Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to be here today on this conference, and once again, thank you ICD and thank you, Mark, for invitation you give it to me like one of the speakers on this conference. My topics is today peacebuilding, reconciliation, and globalization in an interdependent world, using Bosnia and Herzegovina as an example. Building peace, trust, and globalization in an interdependent world. What does this all mean? If we define the concept of globalization as a process which is an economic, social, cultural, and political activity above national levels, we then ask the questions of whether this means getting rid of borders between countries and creating a new world order. Does this mean a world without walls? If this means democracy, transparency, the respect of human rights, the rights of others and those they are different, equal possibilities for all without discrimination of race, religion, and nation, the equality of opportunities for those who are developed and undeveloped, then these are positive general goals which we all should be striving for. Last year, a conference was held at this institute on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall was for Europe a symbol of freedom, openness, advancement, and appreciation. The wall fell, but became a foundation stone for a united and stronger Europe, or for a new world order. The fall of the Berlin Wall had once again established the country of the German people. The removal of national borders has opened up an unhindered flows of goods, services, workforces, technology, and this will enable advancement in all fields. But does the removal of borders and the intensive process of globalization have only positive implications? It is visible even with the efforts of statesmen and political leaders to make a better and more acceptable order, that we face many challenges and negative effects, such as terrorism, organized criminal activities in all forms. And during the beginning of the 90s, in the last century, the opening up of borders in Europe started, and countries like the Czech and Slovak republics made an agreement on their separation. In the area of ex-Yugoslavia, and especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, walls and borders were built between peoples and nations who had lived side by side for hundreds of years. New walls were built in the heart of Europe, and new walls were built in the eyes of Europe, in front of the eyes of Europe. The bloody war, which was the result of aggression of GNA on those who talked and wanted to be different, resulted in hundreds of thousands of dead, refugees, and displaced persons, destruction of homes, infrastructure, and factories. But the worst consequence of this war was the destruction of the family, which is the basic core of society. In the post-conflict period of the country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, it stood before a huge amount of unsolved questions, which included divided society, three armies and policy forces, destruction of infrastructure. This was all created by the walls which divided the three nations. But the biggest shortcomings and consequences which we have had to face are distrust, seeking the truth, accepting the facts, and learning how to reconcile differences, all in the goal to build a country and society. Before the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina and its citizens stood a number of painful reforms which were necessary to carry out in order that the country began its journey towards the future and to accept European values and achievements in the respect of human rights and institution of a law-abiding country. In acceptance of these values, Bosnia and Herzegovina has also been included in the process of globalization and, in this case, Europeization. Are we learning from Europe, or is Europe learning from us? The wave of process of worldwide globalization has influenced Bosnia and Herzegovina in three ways, and that being in the political, cultural, and economic spheres. The first influence of globalization has been reflected in political changes. One party, one state have been changed to a multi-party state. The socialistic system changed to the capitalistic. Influence of the West, the USA and West Europe, made stronger. But this doesn't mean less interest from the Russia Federation and some countries from the Middle East in the political opportunities of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The second influence is of a cultural aspect. Beside the centuries-old and diverse cultural heritage which the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina abounds with, the wave of globalization has brought new ideas and concepts of culturals and their value, but that in their positive or in their negative light. The media and the availability to information. Today, nearly every third citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina use the internet, even though this is well below the European average. The access to information in media has become an ordinary situation which only a few decades ago existed in the form of an idea coming out of science fiction. At the same time, new trends appeared which were non-specific to most of the patriarchal comprehension on the society in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has resulted in the appearance of specific disapproval aimed against globalization and the appearance of some movements as well as the interpretation of faiths in manner which are not customary to Bosnian and Herzegovinian circumstances. The third influence is reflected in the area of economics, and market economy is one of the goals. Bosnia and Herzegovina has signed an agreement with CEFTA which enables free trade between signatories of the agreement, but does this enable the undeveloped economy of Bosnia and Herzegovina to complete and be competitive in an economic plane? For this reason, globalization in our BiH situation of integration into the EU is like what the State Secretary of the USA, Hillary Clinton, said, the best way to achieving economic stability. With the acceptance of the functional sense of Europeization, it is understood that all entries criteria into membership of the European community has to be applied, and they are freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and basic freedom. The Democrat and philosopher Tomáš Masaryk, back in the year 1920, wrote, "The real federation of the European nation will only begin to exist when the nations become free and unite by themselves. Development of Europe depends on this. If a federation of smaller countries forms, this will be a federation created freely based on the true needs of the people and not in any way through dynastic or imperial goals." The concept of democracy cannot be seen through a universal prism, not only by Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also by the rest of democratic countries worldwide. I would like to list some examples or different concepts of democracy in different countries and cultures, such as the Netherlands, Turkey, Sudan, and many other countries where human rights and freedom have been interpreted and carried out in different ways. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the work has still not been finished. In order for the peace process in Bosnia and Herzegovina to be completely implemented, a postulate for the building of peace should be made, such as reconciliation between nations who live in this area. As I already mentioned, reconciliation is one of the most important pillars to building peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But for the reconciliation between nations, truth is essential. Being prepared for reconciliation and being prepared to build Bosnia and Herzegovina as a country with constitutive nation and citizens who live in it. As long as there are different interpretations of the historical truth, there exists the possibility of the ill-use of individual facts, and certainly could be an obstacle in the path to building peace. Bosnia and Herzegovina is an internationally recognized country. It is a country with constitutive nation in which Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats, and others live. There is a frequent misuse of the fact that Croatians and Serbs have their own national countries, our neighbors' country, the Republic of Croatia and Serbia, and this is connected to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Once again, I would like to emphasize that they are our neighbor countries and that Bosnia and Herzegovina is an independent country, and that is a country with three constitutive nations. Bosnia and Herzegovina cannot be Bosnia and Herzegovina if it's without Croatians and if the goals, truths, and aspirations of any of the constitutive nations are not respected in this country. Even though the Croatians are by number the smallest of the constitutive nation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, this doesn't mean that they need to be marginalized. And for this reason, we need to take care of the interest of the smaller constitutive nation, because this is the only way we can build a stable society. The Croats, like the other two constitutive nations, can represent their own interests and expectations through their elected representatives. Here again, we come up against a number of problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are one of the few countries in the world where there is a constitution in force, which has not gone through the parliamentary procedure and has not been adopted by the democratically elected representatives. A constitution is in force in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which in fact is the peace agreement from Dayton. Did we need Dayton Agreement? Yes, I say yes, because the Dayton Agreement ended the bloody war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this was a great achievement. But for a long number of years now, the Dayton Peace Agreement, like the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, has become a wall, an obstacle for many democratic motion, and in the attempt of Bosnia and Herzegovina to achieve its goal, which it has drawn out, or better said, which have been drafted and through consensus have been accepted by the democratically elected representatives of the nation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as by the representatives of certain political parties. And these goals are Bosnia and Herzegovina into the NATO and Bosnia and Herzegovina into the EU. A consensus exists in Bosnia and Herzegovina concerning these goals. In fact, the same have been defined through a certain number of laws, but it is an unquestionable fact that differences exist in the vision of political representatives on the manner and paths towards achieving the same, which help to strengthen the differences and invisible wall among us. A large number of laws in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which have been in force in the last 10 or more years, have been assigned by the High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina. A question can be asked here on how many of these laws are an obstacle for the democratization of Bosnian and Herzegovinian society. In which way have they been drawn up, and what consequences resulted because of them? Do they equally recognize all the nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, or do they favor some? These are all questions for which I think we should find an answer inside Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, with the help of the friends outside Bosnia and Herzegovina, but by those who understand Bosnia and Herzegovina and not those who think that they understand us, or those who consider that Bosnia and Herzegovina can be given a model which has already used, by which certainly has no perspective. Through the centuries, Bosnia and Herzegovina has been a restless area. Through the centuries, there has been exchange of imperialistic forces in it. Through the centuries, the crossing of the influence of the West and East has occurred. But one fact is irrefutable. Everyone comes, but the nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina stays. All of us in Bosnia and Herzegovina consider this land their own. We all love it, and sometimes we think that we love it more than others, or even then more of it belongs to us than others. And this is one of the problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Respecting others and different thinking, respecting human rights and freedom, not to mention the rights of the nation. Even today, after the October elections, certain political leaders felt that if they, specifically themselves, do not have the institution in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that then Bosnia and Herzegovina will have no perspective, that it will then go radical, which is not true. Or you can ask the question, do these same individuals work in the interest of Bosnia and Herzegovina? To work in interest of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think it's to work in interest of its nations and citizens, and not for individual political option. To work in the interest of the will and wishes of the electorate in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the interest of democracy. As an example, I will take the ex-Yugoslavia and the EU, or better said, some of the members of the EU. In the ex-Yugoslavia, the majority nation tried to implement the democracy through the election system, one man, one vote. What this brought about, we mostly were witness to the inhabitants of ex-Yugoslavia up until the war. The interest of one nation, which makes up the majority, cannot assume the interest of the other nation who live there. This is not democracy, or better said, this is the misuse of democracy and democratical principles in the interest of one nation. In the 70s, in the last century, for this reason, in the Socialistic Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, a new nation was acknowledged as a democratic action and the recognition of nation. Now, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, certain representatives of this nation who fought in the ex-Yugoslavia against the election system, one man, one vote, in Bosnia and Herzegovina advocate the same principle. I think that you cannot build coexistence in this way, and that this doesn't respect human rights, and that this doesn't demolish walls amongst people. But the opposite, it builds the walls, and this doesn't lead us anywhere. To be more exact, this does not lead us to our long since drafted goals. The conception of democracy and human rights and freedom has shown attempt misuse even in some countries who are members of the EU. The slogan of the EU, Unity in Diversity, is frequently questionable. It is all depends on who it is and how it is interpreted. The latest election results in some countries of the EU clearly show this. And now the question, does the EU learn from us, or do we, Bosnia and Herzegovina, learn from the EU? This is a good question, and I think in the understanding of our experience and learning from one another, but above all respecting one another, we can learn a lot and work towards building a world without walls. I personally think that there is not too much effort needed for a world without walls, because before anything else, we need to demolish the walls that are within us and which we build ourselves. How is the question? Knowledge. We need to know each other, accept each other with all our differences, and unite in them. Most people in the world are religious. Most believe in one God. And the holy books proclaim equality amongst people, equality in gender. So a question pops up asking, why are there so many wars, endangering human rights and freedom, and the fact that humiliation has never been more rampant than now? Have we given some things the right name? Why is evil for some good? Is the inclination to lean towards voices a different way of life? Is the desire for someone's wealth a desire for advancement? This means that the religious misuse their faith with the goal to achieve some interest. Are these people believers, Democrats, or free-thinking people? When we demolish the walls in ourselves, when we work on building on ourselves, then we will have results. Does Bosnia and Herzegovina have a perspective? Yes, it does. Of course it does. We must sit down at the table, have to talk openly about the problems which we have to face and about the ways in which these problems can be overcome. But you can still see a big advance in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the last 15 years in many areas, from the reconstruction of demolished buildings, infrastructure buildings, and large number of reforms have been carried out from the lowest municipality level right up to the governmental levels. It is important to mention that it is essential to reform all the institutional authorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, courts, legislative, but also executive institution of authority. And as an example, I would like to explain the establishing legal state institution like the Department for War Crimes of the Bosnia and Herzegovina Court. If Bosnia and Herzegovina succeeds in its efforts to start active talks over the entries and join the European Union and to the NATO, all political subjects need to unconditionally support the work of the Institutional Court Department for War Crimes of Bosnia and Herzegovina. One of the successful examples of reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is directly connected with the building of peace and stabilization, is the reform of the defense system. If I start with the fact that up until the year 2004, we had 2 ministries of defense at the entity levels, 3 armies, and an ununique chain of command, unclearly defined parliamentary and civil command, and that today, in the year 2010, we have 1 Ministry of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina, 1 army, clearly defined control over the armed forces, unique and transparent budget, and with the fact that we don't have a problem functioning, we could ask the question, how can this be possible? How is it possible that 3 warring parties will, all of their fears, frustration, distrust, succeed in building a defense system? This is a difficult, but one, again, that is easy. The system is made up of people. In the year 2004, a consensus was achieved in the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina Parliamentary Assembly, Council of Ministry, that the reform of the defense system had to be carried out, and the Bosnia and Herzegovina needed to be in NATO, which is the first step towards the EU. Representatives of the international community gave our political leaders a lot of support, and there are no differences amongst them in their opinions. We had a goal, we aspired towards this goal, with the perception that all of us have to give up something in the interest of the state, in the interest of the future. Did this mean that the national components be removed, that we needn't talk about the differences in national, religious, or cultural aspect? No. Accepting and respecting all of our differences and putting them into our legislative framework, we have managed to secure the foundations of the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Acceptance in differences. We are not building walls against each other, we're building a bridge between us. As in building and also in demolishing walls, the media has an important role. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is a small amount of affirmative media and news reporters who truthfully convey and present information to the public. A small number of them are independent, objective, and affirmative. Good news is not interesting. So sometimes we get the impression that they compete on whose news is as worse as possible, the better. Does the media have a role in peace building and trust? Yes, they have. But reality is different because here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, after some statements from news reporters, we can recognize which political option they belong or which political option they support. There is no accountability for what has been written or stated, and they define themselves with the following phrase: the right to free expression and access to information. Education is the key to a positive democratic process in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not only where the building of institution is concerned, but also for the return of trust, discussions, and understanding of the needs of others. Education in Bosnia and Herzegovina is a segment where reforms should be made, not only for the educational system, how many program contains which are dealt with in books, and more importantly, on the context of the educational program in the recent historical past. When we talk about a truth, there exists a number of truths in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The reform of high school system in BiH will be considered completed when the university has satisfied the highest criteria and have guaranteed European quality. Above all, the high school institution should be responsible for the momentary needs of society and the work market, and to contain plans for the enabling of professional personnel who will bear the burden in the transition period. Are we, when we talk about peace building and trust in a world without walls, forgetting to mention the contribution of women in peace building and trust, the potential for which I personally feel is not recognized or used enough? Last month, we marked the 10th anniversary of the UN Resolution 1325, where the role of women was recognized. Is gender equality in this plane? Do walls exist? Of course they exist. Written in the Bible is, God made a man, created male and female. Is it not true that even then the foundation for gender equality were laid? Yes, they were, but still we needed Resolution 1325, and this is being carried out in a smaller number of countries. I have to express satisfaction that Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the 8 countries in Europe who has adopted the action plan based on the resolution, UN Resolution 1325. What about the rest of the countries in Europe? Haven't the women in these countries equal rights? Are the human rights and freedom respected in these countries? In Bosnia and Herzegovina, women have the right to vote. They have the opportunity to vote and to be elected. The adopted laws enable us a minimal representation defined in the law of electoral processes. Even though the majority of the electoral body in Bosnia and Herzegovina are women, it is visible to see that women do not vote for women. How do we then recognize a stronger role of women in society when women build walls between themselves? Why is this so? One of the reasons for this is the cultural background, the level of education, which is dependent on economic independency, insufficient introduction in politics, as well as no interest and religious limitations. I feel that the role of women in peace building, trust, and in the post-conflict period is not adequately recognized. We have to strengthen the role of women from the lowest to the highest level of society, where their contribution will always be recognized everywhere. I feel that we do not have to deal with consequences, but have to have more protection. When women define their position, they not only define themselves, they define the family, and the family is the basic cell of the whole of society. This means that women define society, and with that, they define the future. This is why we need to demolish the walls that make a difference between the role of women and men in the building of a society. And again, we can only do this with knowledge. Advising and recommendation for a future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. If Bosnia and Herzegovina is to succeed in its efforts on its path towards the European Union and the North Atlantic Pact, it has to solve some urgent questions. First of all, the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Dayton Peace Agreement, which was signed in 1995, doesn't satisfy the standards of the European Union, and in the near future will represent an obstacle in Bosnia and Herzegovina's path towards the European Union. Reforms on the drafting of the new constitution is necessary, which would ensure for a more functional, legal and democratic Bosnia and Herzegovina. The representatives of all of the constitutive nations have to particularly equal, all as well as the representative of the one of the constitutive nation whose vote contributed to the referendum for independence and unity in Bosnia and Herzegovina 18 years ago. I expected that my vote counts when the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina is in question, as well as the political legal position of the nation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think that is one of my basic human rights, and I'm right to expect this. Do I build walls doing this? No, I don't think so. I only want to be treated equal as everyone else. Just like the President of Republic of Croatia, Mr. Josipovic, said in an interview, and the equality of citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like in the whole of Europe, is gained through national equality. In multinational countries, combinations are necessary. Secondly, the action of the international community should be reconstructed so that it achieves the best effect. The High Representative of EU, who is chaired with the duty to carry out to the Dayton Peace Agreement, has lost almost all of his born authorities. Can one independent country, which has a high representative, be a member of EU? No, it can't. This is another wall, an obstacle or challenge with which the politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina met up with. Even though Bosnia and Herzegovina has had a number of high representatives, I would like to set apart Mr. Miroslav Lajčák as a politician and man whose consistent attitude and efforts for Bosnia and Herzegovina hasn't changed even when his mandate ended. I must put something out and like some conclusion. I think investing in knowledge, investing in youth, respecting history, respecting our differences may be the only recipe for peace building and trust in Bosnia and Herzegovina, thus making it a part of Europe. Thank you for your attention. Maybe I go much more.
Thank you very, very much. You can turn the microphone on. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Questions, please, from the audience. Please.
Thank you. My name is Maria. I come from Bulgaria, but I'm currently educated in the UK at UCL, and I study Slavonic and Eastern European studies, as well as politics and security. I would first like to congratulate you for being such a strong and yet moderate female voice, and I appreciate your comment about the importance of women in peace building and reconciliation. I certainly think that's very important. My question is about the policies that are in place for peace building and reconciliation, because as I think we all agree, reconciliation is a key component of integration. So what are the policies and how effective are they? Thank you.
Thank you. We're running late, but let's take one more question in response. Is there another question? Okay.
Thank you, Madam. I'll go straight to the question. You made your last statement, quote from the Croatian president, the actions of the community, the actions of the international community should be reconstructed so that it can achieve the highest result. So considering that Bosnia and Bosnia and Herzegovina have had direct experience with both the United Nations and with NATO. Considering this experience, what would your reflections be upon the efficacy of multilateral organizations in regards to peace building and also in connecting the statement the Croatian president made? Thank you very much.
What the Croatian president made is some comment on the last election in Bosnia and Herzegovina, October election, because some political leaders see themselves on the head position in Bosnia and Herzegovina like someone who is not national representatives, then representatives for all of national peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina, what isn't true. You must know a better situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, how many people live there. We based everything almost, especially in Ministry of Defense, on the percent of national peoples from 1991. And that's mean about 19% are Croats, 35% are Serbs, and 46% are Bosniaks. And everything is based on this, on national level. And that is our constitution recognized. And that is what is Mr. Josipovic said in his interview. When we speak about peace building process, about the policy, when you ask that question, you must know the Bosnia and Herzegovina is an unusual country. Is not a country like our neighbors' country, like Montenegro, Serbia, or Croatia. We have a Council of Ministry. We don't have a government on the state level. We have Council of Ministry. We have two entities government. In one entity, Republika Srpska, we then have a municipality. In Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have cantonal level and then municipality. That is very different for the people, for the citizens in BiH to understand how we function, how can we do something, and that is the main reason why we have a problem to adapt it, some strategy on the state level to be recognized in the EU or to be recognized in the NATO. The best success is in the defense area, and we together try to take the defense reform like some recipes for other reforms. We need to be a part of the NATO and to be a part of the EU. And I think a new generation, young people, as my colleague said before me, is a future for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Knowledge, education, openness, mind, with, of course, the facts from the history. That is something what we don't forget, but that is something what we can use. And that is like, historia is magistra vitae. And that is something what we can use in positive side.